Chain rule with trig functions. Given that f of x equals cosecant pi of x plus 1, find f prime of x. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do here is rewrite that cosecant because I have a very tenuous grasp of what it even means. So I know that secant is 1 over x. Secant of x equals 1 over cosine of x. Cotangent is obviously 1 over tangent. And cosecant is the other one, which the only one that's really left is 1 over sine of x. So I'm going to rewrite this as f of x equals 1 over sine of pi x plus 1, which equals sine of pi x plus 1 to the negative first. All right, so now we're going to do the power rule. So, and the chain rule. Whoop. So changing f of g of x equals f prime g of x times g prime of x. Now, the chain rule, it's sometimes you have time to go through these details, sometimes you don't. Depending on how fluent you are, feel free to skip steps. Most of these, the AP exams are pretty time sensitive. So if you can skip steps and kind of feel comfortable with it, I recommend it, especially when you're doing the chain rule. The product rule and integration by parts, I would write more out, but for the chain rule, skipping some of these steps, probably a reasonable idea. Okay. So for here, though, we have f of x equals, so the outside function is the power rule. So it'd be x to the negative 1. So f prime of x would equal negative 1 over x squared. So it'd be negative 1 x to the negative 2, but x to the negative 2 is just 1 over x squared. G of x, g normal of x, is sine of pi x plus 1. G prime of x would then equal cosine. So we'll have cosine of pi x plus 1. But then we also have to multiply by the derivative of the interior, which is the chain rule again. So the derivative of pi x plus 1 will just be pi, because the 1 goes away, and derivative of x is just x. And so the derivative of f of g of x is f prime of x, so it'll be negative 1 over x squared, negative 1 over x squared. In this case, where x is g of x, so negative 1 over sine squared of pi x plus 1. Okay, I got that. Whoop. Times g prime of x. Cosine of pi x plus 1 times pi. Yes, I'm good with that. And so now let's see if we have what our possible answers are here. So it looks like we have it right here. Yep. So we have negative pi, check, right there. Cosine pi of x plus 1, check. And then on the bottom we have sine pi of x quantity squared, check. Okay, so this is the answer, right here. One of the other possible ways you might see this written is, since you have a cosine and a sine on top of each other, this could have been cotangent of pi x plus 1 divided by sine of pi x plus 1 times negative pi. So that's another possible way you could have seen it written, but this time it was all just written out in terms of sines and cosines. So that's how you approach a trig function, especially when you see cosecant or secant. If possible, I always like to go back to the fundamental sines and cosines. So you have sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent. But really, you can write everything in terms of sines and cosines. And when possible, I recommend doing that just because it helps keep things a little bit more straight. So that's how you do chain rule with trig functions.